Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Bohar.
You're muted, Jim.
Happening. I'm on now.
Stay here.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Here.
Commissioner Wellender.
Yep.
And Chair Felder.
Here. Exciting times. Wendy, if you can put up the flag, we'll do the pledge, please.
I will in just a second here.
And by the way, we're recording if you weren't aware of it.
Oh, good. There we go.
Okay, if everybody will join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome everybody from the commission. Sorry for the slow start, but I think we're here now. I don't believe that there will be any question about meeting length since we only have one active item on the agenda and it does not involve a decision, so there won't have to read the rights of appeal. So we'll move on to comments from the public. Because this is a virtual meeting, the public is able to submit comments by email or participate by Zoom video conferencing. Are there anyone from the public that has joined in to give us a public comment?
I see no hands being raised and there is no written correspondence.
Okay, with that, I will close comments from the public. Review and acceptance of agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none. Late correspondence.
Any late correspondence that was received was put in the document. I'm not aware of any.
I didn't see anything there, but there was a correspondence from David Icar that went out to the commission.
Oh, great. We'll make sure that gets uploaded to the public comment.
That was regarding the item for discussion 9.1. Anyone else have anything on that? Move on to the consent calendar.
Fred Alabach just sent us a chat saying, did we get his comment?
I haven't seen them. I don't know where they came in.
No, I didn't see anything in the public comment mailbox. So if you'd like to send that to the public comment mailbox at public comment, we'll get that posted to the document folder.
It looks like he sent it to Rebecca. Okay, we're at the consent calendar then. All items listed on the consent calendar is considered to be routine, will be acted upon by a single motion. No separate discussion of these items unless the members of the Planning Commission, staff, or public request items to be removed. The only item on the consent calendar is the approval of the minutes from the meeting of August 13th. Anyone want to remove those minutes for any reason? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Barbos.
Aye.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar.
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Commissioner Wellender.
Yes.
Chair Felder.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 6 and 1 abstain.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the public hearing. We had an item 8.1, which was a discussion and possible action on a use permit to allow a live-work unit at 588 First Street West. But the staff has recommended that we continue this item to the Planning Commission of October 8th because it was incomplete. It wasn't ready with the staff report. So I will take a motion to continue this to the meeting of October 8th, please.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
A roll call vote?
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett,
Yes.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
Yes.
Chair Felder.
Yes,
Thank you. The motion passes 7-0.
thank you. Moving right along, we're on item number 9, items for discussion. And the item 9.1 is a discussion related to the housing element process and development code updates. With that, we will have a report from staff. Who's going to lead it off, Wendy?
I'll take it from the beginning.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair Felder and members of the commission. I thought we'd have a little bit of fun tonight. It being September and all, I thought we'd all go back to school and learn a little bit about the housing element together. So we're going to start off with the housing element 101. So we're just going to talk about basic housing element information and timing. And keep in mind that last cycle's housing allocation was 137 housing units. Just keep that number in the back of your mind. Then we're going to move on to housing element 201, talk about what we're going to be doing in the next 6 months, timing, and what some of our challenges are. And then we're going to graduate to housing element 301, where we're going to watch a staff presentation from the Sacramento area Council of Governments. It was a staff presentation made to them earlier this month about the site inventory guidebook. So housing element 101. A housing element provides an analysis of a community's housing needs for all income levels and strategies to respond to provide for those housing needs. It's a key part of the city's overall general plan. The purpose of the housing element is to identify the community's needs, to state the community's goals and objectives with regard to housing production, rehabilitation, and conservation to meet those needs.
Excuse me, Wendy.
Yes.
Are you showing, is there something that's supposed to be on screen while you're saying all this?
Yes.
I'm not seeing anything.
The
I have it
presentation.
displayed.
I see it.
I see it.
I see it.
That's interesting.
Gary, you need new glasses?
If you go, Larry, if you go to the top middle, there should be a thing that about viewing the screen, and there are view options.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great. So back to school. Housing conservation to meet the needs and define the policies and programs that the community will implement to achieve the stated goals and objectives. State law requires cities and counties to address the needs of all income groups in the housing element. The official definition of these needs is provided by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, for each city and county within its geographic jurisdiction. Beyond these income-based housing needs, the housing element must also address special needs groups, such as persons with disabilities and homeless persons. Sonoma updates its housing element in order to comply with state requirements and to plan for meeting its updated regional housing needs allocation, otherwise known as RHNA, and assigned by the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG. The housing element is also a required element of the city's general plan and an important tool that the city uses to plan for the existing and future housing needs of the community. In June of this year, HCD issued ABAG, a housing need of 441,176 units as part of the sixth cycle RHNA process for the years 2023 to 2031. The Regional Housing Needs Determination, RHND, is made every 8 years by the HCD that identifies specific housing needs across California. So this 441,176 number is approximately twice the determination that the Bay Area received in February of 2012 for the current RHNA cycle, and reflects challenges to state law and growth over the past 8 years. It's the city's legal responsibility to show that opportunities exist that allow for the units to be built. It's not the city's responsibility to fund and build every unit. This is the current RHNA cycle allocation. As you can see, there are 24 very low units, 23 low, 27 moderate, 63 above moderate, for a total of 137 units. The last housing element took about 1 year to award the consultant contract, conduct public hearings, and adopt. But the last update did not necessitate any changes in land use designations or rezonings, as the land inventory analysis found that the existing development capacity was sufficient to meet the projected housing needs. So this is an updated chart of the status through 2019. The middle chart is the slide that I showed you about our current RHNA allocation. And the chart on the bottom is the current status of where we are. So overall, it looks like we're in good shape. We're on board to have 203 new housing units, which is well above 137, which is our required number. We're on track with our very low units. We're just 5 down from our low number. We've just got to build 5 more low income units. We're above on our moderate. And of course, we're above on our above moderate. So you might ask, why is staff spending time working on the housing element now when it doesn't need to be adopted until 2023? Congratulations, you graduated from Housing Element 101, and now we'll go into Housing Element 201. So over the course of the next 6 months, planning staff is going to be busy. We're going to work on licensing the cannabis business in Sonoma. We've got one storefront business. Spark is going to operate it. We're still working on the Verizon sites. We've got some properties to annex into the city. Of course, we're working on the housing element. We started that tonight, and later on tonight we'll have a presentation on the development code update. Oh, shoot, don't look at that. I forgot. I was supposed to ask you, does anyone have an idea of how many acres outside the city limits, but within the sphere of influence are available? And so you probably just saw my last slide, but does anyone have an idea?
Less than 100.
Okay, it's more than that. It's actually 245 acres.
Oh.
So David Storr went through and identified these different areas of areas outside of the city limits, but within the sphere of influence that could be annexed into the city of Sonoma. And he found that there's over 245 acres. So we've got some space to work with. The city This is a subsection of Housing Element 201 titled, What to Do, What We Need to Know, Part 1. So the city's received annexation applications in areas 6 and 8. Area 6, the property is called the Doyle property, and it's on the corner of Napa Road and 5th Street East. And also the Zapponi property, which is located south of Napa Road, for a total combined acres of 8. What to do, what do we know, part 2. So Permit Sonoma, which is known as Sonoma County, has identified 59 potential sites throughout the county to allow by right medium density housing. And the county's in the process of rezoning for 1 acre properties in area 8, which is known as the Merlot properties. And they've commenced with the secret review process. These properties, highlighted with the red dots, are south of Leveroni Road, south of Sonoma Market. And they may be
Sonoma Market or Broadway Market?
Broadway Market, thank you very much. The Merlots, they're the property owners. They may be interested in jumping on the wagon with the Zapponi annexation. And if that were the case, if they wanted to pursue that, they'd also need to get the property that Broadway Market is located on, and this L-shaped property that surrounds it to be annexed as well, as the city only allows adjacent properties to the city limits to be annexed.
And that's LAFCO's regulation as well. They don't want island annexations.
That's right. Thank you.
Whatever I can do.
I appreciate it. I need all the help I can get. So what to do, what do we know, part 3. So this slide shows our RENA progress from 1999 to 2018. 2 or 3 cycles ago, the total housing need was almost 231,000. And then the cycle from 2007 to 2014, it was lowered to 2014. And then the current cycle is even less than that. This is the regional cycle. And as you can see, in the very low and low income, it's only a 15% percentile. Moving forward in what to do, what do we know, part 4, the ABAG, HCD has provided ABAG with a regional housing need determination of a total of 441,176. But as you can see, the very low percentage is much higher than 15%. It's almost 26%. So this is an increase of 53,182 units over the prior 8-year 5th housing element cycle number of 187,994. And as with other council of governments that have received their 6th cycle RHNDs and provided their respective communities with their RENAs, the city of Sonoma can expect a RENA number double or triple its past RENA number of 137 units. And although it hasn't been decided yet, we're looking at between 275 and 415 units, and possibly a high of 600 units could happen based on the preliminary housing methodology committee analysis.
When do we expect to hear on that number?
Well, later on in the presentation, I have a timeline, but it's going to be in, I believe, March of 2021.
And one further question, Wendy.
Yes,
The new RENA number covers how many years?
8.
8. So if we divide even at your maximum of 600 by 8, that's it's probably something around 70 units a year,
Right.
which is very close to our growth management ordinance number anyway.
That very well could be. I think where we're going to run into challenges is the number of low and very low income units that we'll need to provide.
Well, we're going to have to come up with some money to facilitate development of affordable housing. Otherwise, it won't get built.
Good point. So moving forward, here's the timeline. What to do? What do we know? Part 6. So the final methodology draft allocation will be in March of 2021. Right now, we're here in between July and November. So the HMC is working on proposed methodology to figure out how that allocation is going to be divided up amongst the different communities. And they're working on a number of different methodologies, and David and I have been participating in some meetings, and it's not as easy as you'd think it would be. We're hoping to have a draft methodology in November of this year with the final draft allocation in March 2021. Then over the summer, there'll be an appeal period where if a city or county doesn't like their allocation, they could appeal it, with the final allocation being in September 2021. And then our housing element would actually be due a year and a couple months later. So not a lot of time. Again, 137 was our number last time. Staff's projections is that we're probably going to need to provide 120 very low income, 70 low, 80 moderate, and 180 above moderate.
Sounds very doable to me.
I like your positive attitude, but staff is concerned because we think it's going to be difficult to get 450 units without annexations and rezonings. Also, the statute requires cities to rezone and allow by right higher densities within the first 3 years for any cycle 4 and cycle 5 repeater sites. So this is a map of our current housing opportunity sites. So take, for example, the project or the property that's a housing opportunity site on the corner of 5th Street West and West MacArthur. I believe that's been a housing opportunity site for the last 2 RENA cycles. So moving forward, if we wanted to have that as a housing opportunity site, we would be required to upzone the property and also allow development to happen by right with just a building permit. So there would be no discretionary review for that project.
Well, there's one other opportunity that can you go back to that map for a second?
Sure.
One other piece of property that I don't see noted on here, and I don't know how it's designated at the moment, it's designated as a preserve, is the St. Francis Preserve property, which is probably about 8 acres and owned by the city of Sonoma itself, and could be redesignated, zoned, portion of it sold, portion of it donated for affordable housing. I mean, there's all kinds of options on that property because the wetland status, as I understand it, has expired because the particular plant that was being encouraged by that wetland set aside has not reestablished itself. And so the city's sitting on an 8-acre parcel that's available for development. That's a lot of houses.
Yes, we need to negotiate with the Department of Fish and Game to release their control over that property. And I think that will put Commissioner Barnett as the chair of that committee to reach out to the Fish and Game, make that happen. But
Larry, where is that parcel?
It's at the end of Bragg Street, which is off Clay. So it's about 1 block north of the lodge.
It's northwest of the Saw project in Orange that you see on Broadway.
Okay,
And it was a project, it was a set aside when I was on the city council for in trade essentially for the development opportunity of the houses in that neighborhood that surrounds it.
Yeah, we're not forgetting about that, Larry. Thank you for reminding us about it.
Okay.
So this is from the current housing element. It has a list of all of the housing opportunity sites. As you can see, the First Street East project has a realistic development potential of 53. There's a project property down on Curtin Lane that has a development potential of 50 units. There is some properties on Sonoma Highway that have some development potential. So all of those sites that have been listed in previous housing opportunities would essentially need to be upzoned and allowed to be developed without any discretionary review.
And that gets you to 391.
Well, if we can we just let Wendy follow? Otherwise, we'll get caught in the weeds here.
I was just trying to see what the bottom line was on that previous sheet. That's all.
Yeah, it's been there for about 8 years now. The numbers haven't changed. What we can do, what we're trying to do, is show you that the world has moved on with respect to development of some of those sites. And for example, we've got in there the Mockingbird Lane. We've now got the Saha site being removed from those that were identified in 2014. And so what we're trying to do is focus in on having to come up with a new table, as we sent out in the guidelines from HCD, that their reporting process has been cranked up to volume 11 when it comes to how you're going to determine what sites get on their matrix that we need to submit. So what we're doing here is just trying to show you that there's a world that's changed, and we're going to need to do some rezonings. So
Thank you, David.
I have a question. You said that if a housing opportunity site has not been developed after a few cycles, it would be upzoned. What happens if a housing opportunity site is already zoned at the highest level that we have in Sonoma, for example, 20 units an acre? How would that be in that instance upzoned?
So if I can just address that, the statute that Wendy put on there, if you can go back, Wendy, real quick. Keep going.
I'm trying.
Okay, it takes a while, huh? There we go. Code 65583.2C. That basically says, and we tried to do a summary here without getting too detailed, basically says that if you want to recognize and claim credit for future development of sites where you've not been good boys and girls in developing over the 2 prior 8-year cycles, if you dare to put those back onto your matrix to count those, you have to then rezone within the first 3 years of the 8-year cycle and allow by right medium to high density housing. So if we've got them there on cycle 4 and 5 at 20 units to the acre, we probably have to do something that will allow a density bonus to get more density, if you will. The theory being is without doing subdivisions, they want to have very low and low income people not having to go through subdivision, but allowing a building permit to be granted to those developers. And these sites generally have to be 2 acres or more. They want to be able to have somebody walk in and just get a building permit for those, as opposed to going through any form of discretionary review. If you read that section there, Commissioner Barnett, it'll give you more of the weeds as to how you then determine whether they can be bent towards your RENA number.
Thank you, David. So moving right along, I'm going back to where I left off here. So we're earlier in the presentation, I noted that Area 6 and Area 8 outside the city limits has a high potential for new units. Area 6 has a potential for 50 units. And Area 8, with the Merlot sites and the property behind or below Broadway Market and the Zapponi property and south of Zapponi, we have well over 220 units there. So take, for example, if you will, if we're required to provide for 480 units and our status quo over the years, we'd have 480 minus 320, which is what we've historically been doing. We'd have 160 units that we'd need to be able to show that we could develop, minus 80, which is ADUs at 10 per year, which has been our historic status quo. We'd need 80 additional units.
Yeah, Wendy, if I could just comment that 320 was the number that we had on the prior slide, not our past production. So this is if we annexed all of those units right there, we would be able to get to 320 without having to toy with cycle 4 and cycle 5 upzonings, or as Commissioner Barnett, Larry said, come up with some new vacant land or non-vacant land, and we haven't got into that discussion yet. So what Wendy has shown here is that the state will recognize ADUs, but they're not going to let you project a number that's not reasonably related to what your production has been. I've seen some jurisdictions claim through this first cycle of the sixth cycle, if you will, this first process, whether you're in Sandag or Los Angeles area, people have gone anywhere from 5 to 15% of their RENA number claiming credit for ADUs. But this is a safe harbor for us because we wouldn't have to explain a percentage of what we hope will happen. This is actually based on annual trends that we have. So it's likely, without having to find some sites within our city limits that we can convert from vacant land or do any cycle 4 or 5 projects, we would need to figure out how to get an additional 80 units. This is all theoretical. So if you want to carry on, Wendy, thanks.
Okay. So of the 9 areas that have potential to be annexed into the city of Sonoma, you might see Southeast Sonoma and South Sonoma, but also you'd see Traintown is on that list. And so we've got to decide if.
And let me tell you, just from a historical perspective, the last time the city council had a discussion about annexing Traintown, the owner of Traintown came to the meeting and said the next time he came to a meeting about the annexation of his property, he'd be bringing his gun with him.
That's worse than a pitchfork.
or
Just let you know what the reality is.
Yeah, if I could just do a quick sidebar since you went that route, Commissioner Barnett. In 2000, I'm going to guess that people weren't so much familiar with Cortese Knox Hertzberg, but the legislature has provided for an expedited process to bring in islands because those are anathema to LAFCO and always have been. The question is it worth the battle? Because there's no units that we can yield from that anyway. It would just simply be curing an island problem, if you will, although it sounds like there may be some casualties along the way in doing that.
Yeah.
And we'll send Wendy out there as our first contact because, I mean, who's going to point a gun at Wendy?
Right. And we've highlighted Southeast Sonoma and South Sonoma. And David, do you have anything further to say about those 2 areas?
No, so just for frame of reference, Southeast Sonoma is the Doyle property with an intervening 0.6 acres that's slightly to the west of that we showed on the graphic. And we can go back to that. From a LAFCO perspective, it makes no sense to us going in and just rounding off that corner for the 2.8 acres of Doyle and not bring in and square off the corner of that property just slightly to the west of Doyle. And that would really be a decision of the city council, because ultimately with these two applications that we have, we do an environmental document, and then we also go to the city council for their direction for us to apply for annexation, which is a discretionary call on their part.
And does this list that's currently on screen, does this include any commercial properties and housing potential on any of those?
No, this is property between the current city limits and the urban growth boundary. And so the answer is partly yes, because if you see the South Sonoma number 8, that includes Broadway Market and the 2 acres that surround it. And those are all classified gateway commercial. And I believe so too is the Zapponi piece, along with the 2.5 acres. Zapponi is 5 acres. South of the Zapponi, Serafini is a 2.5 acre site. And I believe that's all also commercial gateway. So that would be the answer to your question.
Okay, but commercial properties along West Napa Street between the curve and say 5th Street, none of those have been considered at this point in terms of development potential for housing?
Well, we've not identified them in the math here, but what we have done is had discussions with HCD about the possibility of converting, if you will, non-vacant land. In order to get non-vacant land to be ascribed a number, there has to be a reasonable opportunity that those will develop within that 8-year cycle. So the concept of converting commercially zoned property that's already got uses on it, that's a tougher sell than trying to go back through and find vacant land.
Yeah.
So we're not washing our hands of it. It's just that we're trying to simply come up with some of the other ways to get to those units, because 450 is going to be a tall order.
I'm just thinking in terms of, for example, without targeting it, the Chevy dealer property, which at this point, given the rise of online auto purchasing, I really don't think that auto dealerships are going to be a particularly viable real estate use, particularly even if you have an office. There's going to be no need to have enormous parking lots filled with cars in order to fulfill the buyer needs. So I think that one would, for example, be a reasonable and really not a stretch at all over an 8-year period. And that's probably 3-4 acres right there.
Yeah, the only concern with that, and certainly not trying to be argumentative, is we would have to show HCD that we have a history of having successfully converted non-vacant land to residential uses, and explain to them how it will occur. Some of your argument there would be part of that explanation to HCD should we go along the Napa Street for any kind of conversion of commercial or non-residential that's currently not vacant. So yeah, there's a tough road to hoe.
Yep. So moving on to the Denmark area, there are 11 parcels in this county pocket surrounded by city. And so there's an opportunity to annex those properties into the city.
This is Denmark and this is Denmark west of 5th Street East?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and what we did is, what I did, I was the one that came up with these magical areas, if you will. I was just trying to make it so that it was explainable. So we basically we call this Denmark, and then we've got the East Denmark, if you will, which is on the east side of 5th Street, just so that we can separate them, because this is an island, as opposed to the ones on the three. I think there's 2 parcels or 3 parcels on the east side of 5th Street East.
Right.
2 of those parcels on that previous slide are currently being developed within the county.
That is correct, and the property owner, Bennett
Martin.
Thank you. He approached me within my first week of being at the city about an interest in increasing the density out there. But what you see out there is what is permissible only through the county without annexation. So there would be an interest in increased density there. Gary Lane, I think we've just shown that those eight parcels or so. We've shown those just to show the geography of the area of the island.
Did you say Bennett Martin?
Yes, sir.
He's a former planning commissioner.
Correct.
But it seems like with a couple of houses already being built on two of those parcels, that some of that, the horse is out of the barn. To properly develop those with higher density.
Well, if that would require an increase in the zoning, pre-annexation, pre-zoning, and increasing the density there, similar to what the county's already started on the Merlot properties on the west side of Broadway. That train has already left the station as well.
So here's some trains that are still in the station in Area 6. We've got the Doyle property here on the corner of Napa Road and 5th Street East. And then we've got this little island here that is just hanging out, just waiting to be annexed. And those two properties total 3.5 acres. Here's the 8 parcels in Area 8 for a total of almost 14 acres. Congratulations.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. If you just go back to that, if I could just make a quick comment.
Sure.
The darker orange there is the current city limits. The light yellow is the land between the current city limits and that darker blue line with the UGB. The parcel to the east of Broadway, directly south of the orange, that is the 5 acres Zapponi site. South of it is a 2.5 acre piece of property that we have not had any contact with the property owner, but we call it the south of Zapponi piece or Serafini piece. To the west of Broadway, you can see the small rectangle where Broadway Market is, surrounded by a 2 acre parcel, L-shaped parcel. And then the 4 parcels that are owned by Mr. Merlot, those are the 4 that the county have already started using their SB2 money, grant money, to have that rezoned. It's going to be about a $300,000 contract that they're pursuing to rezone those 59 properties. Nothing we can do to stop that. That's within their territory. They're doing it as we speak. So those densities can increase.
And what density are they looking at there?
Medium density, which would be anywhere from 10 to 20 units. Who knows what the county is going to pre-zone them at. The question then would then be, could Merlot's properties come into the city? Well, actually, could those properties develop in the county? And the answer would be no, unless you get city sewer and water. And that therein is where the Merlot property has received its GMOs. And we're not going to talk about that tonight. That's a PhD level because there's a lot of history on that. The point being here and talking about this particular strategy is, in talking with De Nova Homes, they have the Doyle piece just slightly to the east of the Zapponi Serafini site, and they would like to proceed with their environmental documentation on both of those projects in order to get either the green light or the red light from the city council to move to LAFCO. The question then becomes, what happens if we want to annex Merlot at the same time as we annex in the Zapponi Serafini piece and possibly the piece to the south of Zapponi Serafini? That creates a broader question on the environmental front when it's connected to Doyle and to Zapponi Serafini. It makes no sense to me to bring those 4 in because if Zapponi Serafini and the south parcel of Zapponi Serafini never materialize, then we would have 4 1-acre parcels that are not attached to the city limits until we bring in the Broadway Market and the L-shape surrounding it. Sorry for the interruption, Wendy.
Thank you. That was good information. So congratulations. You've graduated from housing element 201, and now we're going to go to housing element 301. And this has to do with the housing element site inventory guidebook that was included in the staff report. And I'm sure that all of you have it memorized because there will be a quiz later. One of the most challenging components of the housing element is the site's inventory. In it, the city must demonstrate suitable land zoned at suitable densities to accommodate the allocations. In June, HCD released the housing element site inventory guidebook to assist jurisdictions and interested parties with the development of the site inventory for 6th cycle housing elements. While the specific requirements of site inventories are detailed in statute and in the HCD building block website, this guidebook provides a much more technical workflow for jurisdictions and includes how HCD will be interpreting the many changes to state law in the last 5 years. The site's inventory is one of the critical components required as a part of housing element updates. It's where local governments must demonstrate suitable land zoned at suitable densities to accommodate the RENA allocation. So the Sacramento Area Council of Governments gave a presentation, a staff presentation earlier this month on September 3rd. And David and I thought, instead of reinventing the wheel, we just watched this presentation. So here you go.
Wendy, do you have the audio?
Nope.
You're not hearing it?
Yeah.
I'm hearing it. Well, huh. Okay, just a second here. And I will get it up.
If you don't have it, Wendy, I have it on a DVR that I could turn the audio on at the same time that you start the video, and that might work as a plan B if you don't get it.
Oh, I think I can just go to the YouTube site. Just a second here.
While Wendy's doing that, I can just provide a couple of comments that I've been taking notes as we've been talking. One of the things that the Housing Methodology Committee is dealing with, and if I can just by introduction tell you who that group is, you all know that ABAG is 101 cities, and the Housing Methodology Committee is made up of members of the city councils, planning commissions, and staff from a variety of agencies in the Bay Area. We have a representative from Sonoma County on that HMC, along with the planning director for the city of Cotati. And the take home that we're getting on the preliminary numbers are that basically what's going to happen is the percentages assigned to most cities will change from the above moderate about 6, 7, 8%, and that'll get flipped back over to the very low income category. That's the trend we've seen in LA, SACOG and the like. So we'll see a different flavor. Just by way of telling you a little bit about how crazy the methodology process is, the city of Sebastopol has been assigned a RENA ranging anywhere from 700 to 900 units. I don't know if you've been to Sebastopol lately, but that's pretty much crazy for them. Yeah, Kelso, Commissioner Barnett, Kelso.
Yeah, so I was always under the impression that ABAG wanted to place housing in places with mass transit and jobs and transportation and water and all the essential infrastructure that will provide, you know, the basis and the foundation for these new units. And last time, you know, I checked in Sonoma, we don't have any mass transit. We have a bus that comes every 2 hours. We have no freeways in. We have an economy based on a sort of agricultural small town tourist charm. And so from what I remember, every 8 years, we have the same discussion where ABAG gives us a ton of units we can't place. the city pushes back. I know previous city councils have pushed back, previous planning directors have pushed back, and we ultimately end up with a number much less than we were originally assigned. So I guess my first question is, does ABAG understand that the city of Sonoma, for example, it's difficult to just, you know, put in 400, 500 units, number one. Number two, do you anticipate a sort of appeal process or pushback that has happened in the past?
So you have just stated where I was 5 days ago when I penned a letter to ABAG and its staff. It hasn't been sent yet because the next part of the process is that the Housing Methodology Committee will make a final recommendation on September the 18th to the executive board of ABAG, where they'll basically say, hey, look, this is our final set of numbers. Will you please bless them? At which point they'll be divvied out to the local agencies. We'll get to sit and ponder them for a while. We could then go through an appeal process in which to get that number changed. I suspect Sebastopol will have to do that. And to answer your first part, Commissioner Barnett, yes, transit-rich, jobs-rich, urbanized areas, quote unquote, and I've had to use that to our advantage. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. And the point being is, I don't know what reaction that will get, but I can tell you that Piedmont did the very same thing about 2 weeks ago. And it was the focus of some of the discussions because the message was, you don't know what you're doing. And not recognizing the unique geography that we have. We are, for kicks and giggles here, we're one of 7 out of 101 agencies, cities, that are considered part of an urban cluster, which is not an urbanized area, which you have for the cities all along the 101 corridor.
Right.
And yes, in my draft letter that I'm working on still, I point out the fact that we have no mass transit and the like to those job centers other than commute patterns and 90-minute headways.
And to that point, what you just said, David, we are sort of an urban cluster in the Sonoma Valley, and I know that this has been discussed a lot lately, but you know, our jurisdictional issues, most of the people that live in Sonoma Valley do not live within the city of Sonoma. And perhaps there could be growth within the Sonoma Valley that will satisfy some of our housing needs, but the city of Sonoma, because basically we're one area, but the city of Sonoma won't receive credit for that. And the city of Sonoma is, for all intents and purposes, the commercial center for a valley of 40,000 people. And so we might be in a situation where we have to take off the books potential commercial producing lands in the city of Sonoma that not only would provide the city tax revenue, but also provide commercial services for the entire valley, because we have to meet these RHNA numbers. And
yeah, that point has not been lost on me.
Yeah,
that point is not lost on me, and it's part of my letter, again, that I'm still crafting, that talks about Sonoma Valley being around 33% unincorporated.
yeah.
And the point being is it's more sparse in its density than the city of Sonoma. And the county actually has a much worse problem than we do as well, because their unit count's a lot higher, again, just like the city of Sebastopol. So there are some basic foundational problems with the Housing Methodology Committee and its role. But again, that is a design by committee process, and you basically are getting messed up in the hodgepodge of how they do their things within urbanized cities, you know,
Right.
the density of which we're not even close to. Wendy, how you doing on the audio? Are you doing any good? Because I've got a couple more points.
I think we're ready to go.
Okay, let's go through that, and I'll share some other thoughts later.
Okay, I'm going to start this. Please let me know if you can hear the audio.
No.
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 Now,
No.
Okay, so
Well, shoot.
while Wendy works on that, Wendy, let me know if you need me to go to Plan B, and I'll try to tee up Dov on my DVR, and I can just play the audio through my speaker here.
I have a question. Is this something we can do offline as a homework assignment?
We certainly could send you the link, yes.
Because even though it's going to be informative, I have some questions about what you expect of the Planning Commission as staff to participate at least early in this process.
Yeah, and we'll get there in a few minutes. Let me just see if I've, one last comment. We've talked about the regional housing needs allocation that's given to us. Our assignment as a city, that kind of goes into your question, Chair Felder, is we need to figure out how to take some of that yellow on our zoning map, which is your traditional color for single family throughout our city, and change some of that to orange or brown, which is higher density residential, from whether it's medium to high density. And also we'll obviously be looking at net new properties, net new vacant lands that we haven't identified in prior elements. Clearly the one that Commissioner Barnett, Larry said was not included in the last cycle or cycle 5. And there may be a good reason why my predecessor didn't have it in the cycle before that either. So the question is that site right now? Has it changed? And also, are there other things we can do to the mixed use zoning district, which is along our Broadway corridor and our commercial corridor? Are there things there that we can do to increase density or the numbers in order to get to that number of 480? Again, it's a balancing act. There is no penalty for not building. Although some people get confused that, yes, each city in California has to submit an annual progress report to let them know how many single family homes or multifamily dwelling homes we've built during the prior calendar year. So come April the 1st of each year, we report to HCD what our building construction activity has been, because they probably look at that to see how that informs the next RENA cycle numbers. And that's why we placed that slide on the screen to show you where we're at, where we think we'll be at when we report the activity of 2020, which will include Mockingbird and the Saha project. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and send you the link later. It's a 15-minute presentation where it basically is reinforced by the attachment that Wendy sent to you about the take homes from that presentation. Apologize for the inability to get the audio. We'll work on that.
And can we get these PowerPoint presentations sent to us as well?
That'll be fine, not a problem. Wendy, did that conclude your presentation at this point?
Well, yeah, I kind of feel like I failed you all. I'm just joking. I
Good night.
failed. You know, the school thing.
You mean you failed or you failed?
I did.
Oh, no, you did fine.
No
Thank you.
commissioner left behind.
Let's make a motion to have Wendy go to Traintown and talk to the property owner.
So,
I still come back to the question, what do you want us to do as a planning commission? I heard the we, but it sounds like the we is involving either staff or consultants at this point to bring something back to us.
Well, that certainly will be the first step. We do have a consultant. You met the lady that we've been talking to in the past who did our ADU ordinance. That's certainly one process. I think what would be helpful is while we as a staff do that, if your creative minds could say, hey, wait a minute, there's a 5-acre site in this location, or I'm going to look at as a planning commissioner, I'm going to look at that housing opportunity map and say, well, this could really be a higher density than what was in the chart that my predecessor created that then demonstrated that we had more than adequate sites to get to the 137. Clearly, if we put the hat on right now and say the number's 450, and by the way, the Housing Methodology Committee has a low of 440 and a high of 480. And I had come up with the 450 before I even knew about that range that they came up with. And again, our hope is to get not so much the argument being we want to get as low a number as possible. It's please apply an appropriate methodology that makes sense for Sonoma. And then we'll figure out how to get the income categories sorted out by painting, you know, orange, yellow, browns, whatever's where they need to be in order to get to that number on our map. But I think if the commission could look at the map that we have, the chart that shows land within the city limits, and the map that shows lands that are out in the tables, we can come back and report to you in a couple of months on how we're doing and report back.
And let me ask, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Larry.
Let me ask a question about existing properties that were granted development rights in the past that have not been fully developed. In other words, they're vested under the previous permit approvals of an earlier planning commission. Specifically, I'm thinking of Armstrong Estates, where you've got a permit approval for 53 homes on 22,500 square foot lots. At this point, only about half of them have been developed into homes. Now, if Steve Ledson were interested in coming back to the city and looking for approval to develop some of those lots at a higher density with houses, with smaller houses akin to what he's done with these more recent developments he's done, is that something that the permitting process would allow, or is he locked in to 22,500 square foot lot sizes?
That would classify in HCD's mind as a non-vacant property. But if we go ahead and rezone that to allow for lots that are 10,000 square feet, we could then do that and claim that right if we rezone those properties to get that yield. Yes.
And if he were agreeable to that, does that facilitate that process of rezoning?
Yes, it does. I don't know how many units we're talking about above, but anything in the order of 30 to 50 acre units will be heaven sent. I mean, because as I've shown, what that would then do is create less pressure to do any annexations.
Yeah, well, you know, I think there's a pretty significant opportunity there if Steve was willing. Now, the people who own those $3 million homes on those current parcels may not like the idea, but some of them at the edges, in other words, there's a lot of vacant parcels that front on Napa Street, which obviously are developing much slower than the internal parcels on that project. And those may be good opportunities. There's some at the edges, like on the southern border of the property on 5th Street East, where you could take, there's 3 or 4 properties there, that parcels that in the aggregate are 88,000. You could, anyway, it's just an idea. If we can go to places that have gotten their entitlements but haven't fully developed, there may be an opportunity to upzone those.
Let's move on. Commissioner Wellender has had his hand up for a long time.
When you talked about the need to revisit our zoning and look at opportunities for converting yellow to orange or orange to brown, I'd really like to have some discussion about what that impact would be in terms of our community and how we're trying to maintain our community. Because one of my frustrations with this whole exercise is Sacramento is telling us how to develop Sonoma, and that doesn't set well with me. And I think there would be value in identifying opportunities, but I think the question we have to ask is in upzoning an area, what is going to be the actual impact to what we have worked hard to maintain here in Sonoma?
I can address that, Commissioner Wallander, if I could. Sure. I think I'd rather go to Mr. Frank at Traintown and take what's coming there than stand before an angry mob of people in Sonoma that are opposed to increased densities throughout the town. I think a lot of people will be loath to seeing some of that yellow convert to brown in their neighborhoods. That's the reality of what's going to happen. I will tell you that ABAC has not been slow to point out that state law does not care one hoot about a GMO, a growth management allocation, or an urban growth boundary. Those things do not make a difference to how you get a reduced RENA number. It matters not to state law in that regard. So yes, Sacramento is telling us what to do and how to define our charm.
And one other comment, if I could. I got nervous when you said that if we have existing parcels that have already been approved for certain development, but they haven't exercised that, they haven't been built, and we grant what we rezone or give them a greater density, then there is no discretionary review. Not to say that we're perfect in our review process, but that makes me real nervous to think that the density could be increased. There's no opportunity to comment on whether or not it's a fit. So I would be a strong proponent of trying to meet our arena numbers, not by trying to capture existing projects that we give a density bonus, but then lose all control of what they could do.
Yeah, again, it's an option to the city in this case for us to look back into the world of cycle 4 and cycle 5 if we choose to bring those in towards our 480, whatever the number is. But the qualification is Mr. Storer has to rezone those properties through the council within the first 3 years, because we've been naughty boys and girls for those prior 16 years. They don't think we have an intent to develop those or allow them to be developed. They're of no value to HCD in their mind. And so we have to justify it by going in and rezoning within the first 3 years of the cycle.
I believe that Commissioner O'Neill had her hand up and been very patient. Sheila, would you like to join in?
Hello, thank you all. I did the digital blue hand raise under participants. I think Kelso finally caught on to that too, but the rest of you just kind of do the old fashioned way. So thank you. I have a couple questions. First, how is assisted living counted in the housing units? That topic's been brought up recently, and I wanted to know how or if assisted living units are counted as part of the RENA numbers.
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. There have been changes in state law. Commissioner O'Neill, and we'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Next question. I know that the city owns some parcels that were not on the housing inventory sheet. And one in particular that I'm thinking of is the land that's associated with the Masonave cottage, not with the Masonave house, but with the cottage in the back. And there's a bit of land back there that seems like a really good site for some higher density housing. And I'm wondering why that one's not showing up anywhere on the inventory.
I can't really explain the prior housing opportunity sites map. Again, within the last 30 days, we've been looking into the parcel that Commissioner Barnett has talked about and getting some environmental documentation on that. Perhaps some of you commissioners can educate David. I don't know why they were or not on the map.
I think
Speak to that last one.
I think on Masonave, I think there's some covenants or conditions on the way that came to the city, that it has to be for public use.
The Masonave house is definitely is a park, but part of the parcel across the street is what Vic Conforti designed those affordable housing units along the bike path. And I'm wondering if the cottage parcel in the back, not necessarily the cottage, but the land behind the cottage that abuts up to the infamous parking lot, the Casa Grande parking lot. I'm wondering if where that parcel fits in.
That I don't know.
Commissioner Barbosa, did you know?
No, but I was just going to say the bequest from Henry Masonave had conditions that required it be used for public purposes in connection with, there's some language, a park, and the city council wrestled with that whole issue during the period that I was on the council.
I know that that applies definitely to the Masonave house and grounds, but I'm talking about the parcel behind that. So anyways, that's one that I'd love to have investigated, see what the possibilities are there.
Sure.
I was wondering also about vacation rentals in the city. I don't know how many vacation rentals there are within the city limits. And is there any value in when some of those convert from being vacation rentals and are no longer permitted and they go back into the housing inventory? Is there any credit gained on those?
I believe the answer is yes, but we'll get back to you on that. I know Wendy has probably a better feel on the number of vacation units. You know that? Can you answer that, Wendy?
I want to say 34, but that could be wine tasting rooms, but I'm just looking that up. It'll just take me a second.
Okay. The Armstrong Estates properties, you mentioned that those were built lots, David, I think you said, but actually I think they're individual parcels and several of them are vacant lots. So those I think would be treated as vacant lots and could be upzoned for higher density. Of course, there's the neighbor issue, but I just wanted to clarify that I think that they're all individual parcels at this point and there are several that are vacant.
I'm kind of curious. Thank you for that, because that may be something that was overlooked in prior cycles. And I've got the 2 prior cycles. So I'll go back to see if there's a record as to why they weren't identified as being, because today they're vacant, right? So,
Well, and from what I understand, Steve Ledson originally wanted to put 6 units per acre in that project, and the planning commission at the time, and this was in the late 80s, basically required them to all be 22,500 square foot lots. It isn't what he wanted. It's what was forced upon him. So he may very well be interested in revisiting that topic today.
well, clearly, if there's 20,000 square foot lots and we make them a minimum of 10,000 square lots, we'd have to change the zoning and he could come in and subdivide those parcels.
Yeah.
Without doing a rezone, perhaps. We'll have to look at the juggling on that, but clearly that's the kind of thing that we need to talk to the commission about, because you know your community better than we do.
Commissioner Kelsel Barnett, you've been very patient.
Thank you. And I apologize for just raising my hand. I'm catching on to the blue hand. So
It's
sorry.
a lot easier than for me to look at that participant list.
Yes. The first thing about Armstrong Estates, I was under the impression the state recently passed a law or was considering passing a law that allowed by right a 4-plex on any single family property. So I assume that would apply to Armstrong Estates. Was that law passed or?
No.
Okay. But if that law were to pass, if that comes back, I assume that would affect and apply to Armstrong Estates. And then my only other question would be, I assume Armstrong Estates has an HOA with CC&Rs, et cetera. Like, I can't imagine they would allow lots within their HOA to just be upzoned like that. But I don't know. That's an interesting situation.
Well, the one thing I can tell you about CC&R is that they have no effect upon the city of Sonoma.
Okay. Well,
they don't trump your subdivision ordinance, and they don't trump your zoning either.
okay, there you go. The other comment I had was with regard to our planning director's comment about us being naughty boys and girls. All I would say on that is, and from my perspective, on most of our projects, I feel like the Planning Commission approves generally. I mean, obviously, we put applicants, we expect excellence from our applicants, and we apply our development code and our general plan. But from what I understand, at least historically, and I can go back, a long time, we approve most of our projects. And really, the only housing opportunity site that I felt like had some issues that was just presented to us was a project that wanted to use the max residential density, but also add a 4 or 5 story hotel, a 60-room hotel, or then, a massive commercial assisted living facility. And so, if we just focus on the housing opportunity, I think obviously those numbers could be met. It's really when you add in all these other types of projects to a housing opportunity. And so, I would argue, if HCD wants to listen, that we have never been counting boys and girls. We've actually been, you know, quite, I think, progressive in Sonoma in terms of providing and approving housing. And so that was one comment.
Also, if I, Commissioner Barnett, also, if I could, if you look in the guidelines from HCD, that section that Wendy provided on the screen, and you'll see that when we send it out to you. I reviewed it again this afternoon just to make sure I knew what I was talking about. And they do provide a very clear description of what by right means, which means that it will prohibit a planned development permit, a conditional use permit, any form of discretion to be exercised by any city in California. So what they're doing is they're telling us the way that a ministerial permit needs to be approved, which is what Wendy said, and that is straight to the building counter, build those higher densities. And I don't think there's ever an intent to try to invoke ourselves into an area that we're not welcome. The question is, are we willing as a city to give up that right to be able to see a project? And right now that is going to be taken away only if we take into consideration cycle 4 and cycle 5 housing opportunity sites from prior elements. One of which, let's just talk about that one very quickly, because we received an application on First Street East. That is a housing opportunity site. So any number of units that we choose not to put there at a 20 unit per acre, that's an opportunity that we don't get to take credit for in the next cycle unless we rezone it by right. And that could be a problem for our city.
No, I know, I understand, and I agree with that. And then my final comment is, and I haven't been privy to these conversations with ABAG that you and Wendy have, but has there been any sort of general, 30,000 foot discussion about where California is going at this point? Meaning there seems to just be discussion that, oh, well, California is going to grow by X%, and so we need to double or triple our RHNA numbers, when in reality, maybe that's not the case. I mean, maybe our cost of living is too high. Maybe everyone is moving to Utah and Idaho. Maybe we have, massive fires every fall. Maybe our economy is hurt. For lack of a better term, our one-party rule in Sacramento may have created a climate in California that is not conducive to some things. And I'm just not convinced that we're going to experience the kind of growth we have over the next 10 years in California that we have in the previous 10 years. And so is that being taken into account?
Well, the answer is yeah, but please don't shoot the messenger on this one. Our governor, for good or for worse, has said that he wants to have the BIA do almost triple, almost 500,000 homes in an era. This is all pre-COVID, by the way. He went on record, and I think I reported it in your joint meeting with the council in January, where he said basically you're going to go from typically around 80,000 a year to 240,000 or 200,000 a year to get to my magic 500,000 in 5 years kind of a thing.
Right.
Numbers that we've never even come close to reaching. And you've seen following that comment by the governor that he's been throwing millions and millions of dollars, which he has in good faith, thrown a lot of money into jurisdictions to do SB2 funding, where we're going to get that money. We're going to get other monies to help provide for affordable housing and helping in our zoning code update and our housing element update. Like I mentioned previously, Sonoma County is spending all of their SB2 money to that effort. So our 160,000 is helping go toward paying for our housing element update and any associated environmental work. So the answer is yes. With COVID now, I don't know if he softened his tone or not.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask Commissioner Barbosa or Bohar if you have anything you'd like to join in on.
That is, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
No, I don't. I have nothing to add right now. Thank you.
Steve?
Well, I don't know what role the Planning Commission is expected to play in this, and this goes back to Chair Felder's question early on, but if we're being given all this information, it's not clear to me what is going to be expected of us and what contribution we might make to helping move this process along in a constructive way.
I'll try to give it another shot, commissioners. Our job as a staff is to create a draft housing element, and we could do that in a vacuum. But we're checking in with the commission periodically to say, here's where we're at, this is what we're doing. And if the commission would like to have more input onto the vacant land inventory to assist staff, that'd be great with us. There will be a day when we come to you with a draft housing element and say, will you recommend approval of it to the city council? That kind of a thing before we submit to HCD for it to certify the housing element. But along that way, we can check in with the commission. We could meet with the chair and an ad hoc or something like that. Even talking with the city council, we'll be making a presentation similar to this to the city council. As with the dev code, maybe we have a housing element update code. I'm not sure, but we wanted to, because there were so many moving parts this early in the game. And yes, admittedly, as Wendy said, there's a January of 2023 timeline coming, but by the time you get through the appeal period, assuming that we have to go that route, as with other jurisdictions, we've got less than a year to get that housing element prepared and certified. So now we're starting on that process to start putting the pieces together because we know that we're getting a much higher RENA number.
I guess, thank you, Steve, for those remarks. I would like to see, David, you produce a short list of things that you want the commission to address specifically to help you as you prepare your draft housing element. You've mentioned the opportunity sites or the vacant land, but if you come up with a short list of things that we can participate in and give you feedback on, it would make it easier than to just broad brush this thing and say, we need your help.
Could I have one other comment, Commissioner?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Well, it strikes me after I'm perhaps one of the most recent people to join this, but we have an unusually talented group of people with a lot of institutional knowledge. I'm thinking of Kelso and Larry in particular, who could really help identify sites and give some good ideas. But if we follow the process that normally it seems to occur where we get things like the week before we're supposed to okay them with a thumbs up, thumb down, or it's just not, it loses the value of having these folks on this commission. So I would like to see us have an opportunity to have input earlier on in it and not just be put in the position of having to give a yes or no at the back end.
Well, certainly one thing we could do is have a workshop at the Planning Commission where we talk about some of those short list items that Chair Felder was talking about and invite the public to participate as well as they can tonight. So we're interested in hearing feedback on how we approach the community and coming up with some of these tasks that we're going to have to talk with a consultant about in writing up and preparing the housing element and providing all of the data to us. So certainly open to that.
Chair Felder?
I think let me give Jim Bohar a chance first. He hasn't spoken.
The issue came up at the that Broadway affordable housing project that's underway now about making the affordable housing properties available more or less to locals, or at least favor locals. It didn't go very far, and I'm wondering whether there's any chance of that changing, where we build affordable housing for more or less for our local market first, at least, before it goes back on a regional sort of list. Wendy's presentation started off with serving the housing needs of the community. And then in the next paragraph, it switched over to the fact that, well, it's really a regional application. It seems like a small town like ours really suffers by providing that housing stock for people who might be living in the Canyon or Mill Valley or somewhere. Is there any chance that would change?
Well, I don't know how to answer that because we have to allow for a free market to be able to operate. Our job solely is to provide the ability to put densities on the map. and the market determines who's going to purchase. In the case of Saha, those 49 units are in the very low income category, and whoever applies for those, based if they can make that verification, they would be able to go live there. They haven't opened that up, by the way, yet that I'm aware of, in talking with Adam Cooperman from Saha. The point being is we don't have an ability as a city to say thou shalt only sell to Sonomans or rent to Sonomans.
Well, I know we don't, but it seems like it would be a great idea if we could have a preference, but, and I know that's beyond our capability right now, but is there any chance that would change so that we're really providing it for at least first preference to our own community?
I have no knowledge. I have no idea.
Okay.
Commissioner Larry Bardet.
Couple questions. I think they should be relatively quick. One is vacant land include land used only for parking? Or I mean, is a parcel with parking developed on it not considered vacant?
That would be considered non-vacant land, yeah.
Okay, because for example, behind Staples is an enormous parking lot derived from its time when it was a car dealership. And there's probably 2 or 3 acres behind that building. I think there are a lot of opportunities like that if we really review parcels in detail. My second question has to do with the urban growth boundary. If the urban growth boundary measure passes, what we're doing is we're basically establishing a policy whereby up to 20 acres can be added to the city of Sonoma over a 20-year period, which is 100% affordable and 51% low and very low income. How do we get credited for a policy like that in this whole RENA allocation project?
Well, again, the content of the housing element has to demonstrate how we're going to get to a number of 480 units. The state law doesn't care about our GMO or our urban growth boundary about whatever numbers we have. What I can tell you is that if the number is 480, we've got 8 years to do it. Theoretically, we could produce 60 units per year, which, as you said earlier, is consistent with our growth management ordinance. At the end of the day, again, there's no gun to our head making us develop them. It's just showing that we have the ability to do them within that 8-year cycle. I know that we've been doing on average about 27 since the year 2014. And I think that number was—
There's no way to allocate a portion of the 20 acres over the 20 period into that 8-year period and demonstrate how many units that could possibly produce?
No, there's not.
Okay, thank you.
I guess what I'd like to do is maybe have you put out that short list and then schedule a workshop where we can go through that list and maybe even out of that develop an ad hoc committee to attack some of those items. Does that sound reasonable? Council?
Public.
Yeah, we need to open it up to the public, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, are we, all right, let's do that right now. If anyone for the public would like to add their comments to this discussion item, please raise your hand and let Wendy recognize you.
Yes, we have 2 hands that have been raised at the moment. The first one is from Fred Alabach, so I'm going to allow him to talk. Fred, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, what I'm concerned about as an affordable housing advocate is that I would like to see staff and the Planning Commission place some more emphasis on that particular segment, particularly given the all of the demographics in the valley that show that Sonoma is lacking that. So I would just like to see a little bit more emphasis on that and interest in that from Planning Commission and and perhaps, and my letter didn't make it, so I'll resend it, and hopefully you all get to read it. But I had suggested that the Planning Commission, be a little more activist, which is, I think, some of the sentiment I heard from Steve and Chair Felder tonight. And so I think that's a good idea. We did that on the Community Service and Environmental Commission, and it worked for a while. The city eventually put us in a playpen, but we got some stuff going with that. And so I think if you agitate and, for what you'd like to come up with, then that would work too. So all you would have to do really is to have somebody make a motion to put some activist suggestions on the agenda, then you can discuss it, and then staff has to deal with that. So that's one way to go about that. So anyhow, I'd like to see a little more emphasis on affordable housing and interest in that. If it's going to be 120 units in the new RENA plus 6 to 9% coming off of the above moderate, then I'd just like to see those units really get some attention and not just be the potential that's on the map, but really some interest in seeing that those things do get built. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Fred.
Yes, there's a hand raised from Terry Shore. Terry Shore, you please speak.
Yes, hi, good evening. Chair Felder, Planning Commissioner, staff, and members of the public. My name's Terry Shore. I am the Regional Director for the North Bay for Greenbelt Alliance. I live at 515 Hopkins Street in Sonoma Valley. First, I would just like to thank the Planning Commission staff for the information presented tonight. Though it's really interesting to see the different ways that the city has achieved its RENA numbers in the past, and how it appears to me from the numbers that we will be able to achieve our RENA numbers in the future. And it looks very promising. The numbers that you presented tonight are similar to the ones that the members of the Citizens to the Renew the UGB have come up with, that, we do have space, we have vacant land, we do have places that we can build if we need to, and there is room within the urban growth boundary. It looks like there's over 200 acres, which I didn't know. That's good to know if we need it to move forward. So thank you very much. I'd love to get a copy of the PowerPoint as we move forward. The second comment I would like to say is that I do really appreciate the recommendation by Chair Felder and by several of the commissioners that it be that you set up a workshop or two so that the public can be involved. I like the idea of having an ad hoc, and that there is really top-notch experience among the planning commissioners that could certainly help staff. I've heard a number of things I certainly didn't know tonight about developments and what we could do creatively to ensure that we provide affordable housing, low, very low, moderate housing in particular. So I would really urge you to move forward with that. I know it might take more time and more energy to do that kind of thing, but then in the long run, I think you'll have more support for the housing element, which will need to be done in a short amount of time. So it's kind of like a mini general plan. So I do encourage you to bring in the community and rely on the expertise of the planning commissioners. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
And Terry, if you'd like to send me an email, I'll reply with the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, what is your email? Just Wendy.
WATKINS@sonomacity.org.
Alrighty, thank you.
Okay. The next speaker is Tom Conlon. Tom Conlon, please speak.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay in unmuting myself. I very much enjoyed the presentation tonight as well, so I want to echo Terry's comments. I especially appreciate David and Wendy bringing all this information before us. And I very much do support the Planning Commission being involved at this early stage, and especially in identifying potential for other opportunity sites. I thought that discussion of the risks involved in resubmitting phase 4 and 5 projects is an interesting consideration for us to judge the new site potential against. It occurs to me that the process that the county engaged in this past year, basically putting out a solicitation for opportunity sites, I believe that produced the sites along Broadway that are south of the Broadway market. And it may behoove the city to encourage, beyond just the sort of the in-team, the planning commissioners and those of us who do attend these meetings from time to time, it might make sense to put out more of a call to the community at large to get the idea of whether there's sites that are underutilized and might make it onto your list for this next cycle. So I'd encourage more community participation at this early stage. The city definitely continues to retain full jurisdiction, full authority to not upzone parcels that don't make sense. So I don't think you have any risk in doing that, but you might find opportunities that you hadn't considered. So I'd encourage more of that. Thanks again for your good consideration of this tonight.
Mr. Chair, if I can,
Yes.
it's Wendy. While I'm talking, could you go back to the slide that has the 9 planning areas? I just want to make it clear about some of the acreages that are there. But anyway, it's clear, Mr. Chair, that I need to apologize for not being clear in the direction tonight. This was more of a check-in with the commission to let you know what we're doing as staff, some of the moving parts that are out there as one goes through a process of amending your housing element. Staff has been on a webinar hosted by HCD and ABAG on how to be effective in reaching out to your community with respect to these COVID times that we're in, relative to doing polls and sampling and things of that nature, which we haven't begun. So that will be a recommendation that Wendy and I will work on future steps of engagement for the public and also your commission. So thank you for that direction tonight. I'd like to just spend a half a second or two on this particular map. There was nothing magical about the enumeration of the properties. Wendy, can you enlarge that one on the screen? Just go down to the bottom right-hand corner.
Is Area 1 Maxwell Park?
Yeah.
Yes, it is, sir. Is there a way to zoom in, Wendy, right where the number 1 is? You can see some yellow stuff there, and that's what makes up the 78 other parcels, because Maxwell Park is 2 of those, and it's about 60 acres. So let's not kid ourselves that Area 1 is an area for growth. It isn't. And the same thing with Area 2, that's the Mancini property, and that happens to be outside of the UGB, outside of the city limits. So Area 2 is not going to produce any housing either. So let's not pretend that there's 245 acres out there that is developable with some increased densities. The same with Area 7. Area 7 is Traintown, and that's 10 acres. Area 9 to the southwest of the city, that's the Haddington Road. I forget the name of it. But that's 51 acres and many parcels. Those are not inside our city limits. So we can't really, unless we plan on annexing that, we would then have to up the density there to get any more yield out of it. So we're somewhat very limited in going into the areas between the city limits and the urban growth boundary, which is obviously also our sphere of influence, except for the case of the Mancini property. Thank you.
The Harrington estate is very large. There's some very large individual parcels in that. And of course, at this point, there's no sewer or water that's connected to any of those. Correct. So it's, but it's always been discussed as the logical extension of the city limit.
Yeah, and I think obviously that from a LabCo perspective would square off the corner pretty nicely. I think the purpose of showing you this exhibit was to show, because there's been a lot of discussion recently about the urban growth boundary, to show where there are those gaps, if you will, between our current city limits and the urban growth boundary. That's all that this was intended to do.
Isn't area one where that hotel and housing is already proposed?
I thought it was further north of that.
Yeah, it's north of Verano.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You know, I walk a lot in town, and I just see all kinds of opportunities that aren't necessarily large parcels. You know, they're anywhere between 2 and 3 acres, but there's some really significant opportunities around town. The Smith parcel over at Curtin Lane is developed as a vineyard. It's got a historic building on it, but it's probably 7 or 8 acres right there, adjacent to Sonoma Creek. I think that if we all, as individual council members, can bring our collective knowledge of the city to this process and at least draw attention to some parcels that aren't necessarily getting a lot of attention of planning staff, they're not as familiar with the areas of the town, I think we can be quite helpful to this whole process.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Barnett. And as you're looking at that over the next few months, HCD takes a dim view of anything less than a couple of acres. Then a couple of acres. They take a dim view unless you really have got some compelling reason as to why, you know, an affordable housing builder, for example, there has to have some margin of use there. They certainly don't like parcels greater than 10 acres. Of course, we don't have any of those in our city limits to worry about. So anything from a half acre up to 2 acres, we've got to be pretty smart about it. We can make that argument. As we can make the argument, as I said as Wendy said at the outset, getting credit for ADUs. I mean, if we can show that we're going to be somewhat aggressive, we can claim a greater number of ADUs as well. And HCD ultimately will, you know, tell us that we're smoking something, or that they accept what we've proposed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. Mr. Chair, we do need to close the public hearing.
Yes. Wendy, is there anybody else with their hand raised? You're on mute, Wendy.
No, and there is no written comment on this item.
Okay, I'm going to close the public portion of this item then.
Mr. Chair, with your blessing and of the commission, we'll return not in October, but in November with an update as to where we are, and also come back with a short list of ideas of how to engage the commission and the public.
I would like to schedule a workshop between now and then to keep this discussion going, and especially if you have a short list that we can work on.
Well, Wendy, just trying to think of items on the October agenda. If we're skinny on that, maybe we could do that, have a workshop component of that meeting. Do you have the tentative? Let me see if I can pull up the tentative meeting schedule. I can tell you what we have.
Yeah, I can think of one project that's
So,
going to be on the
Chair,
October meeting.
Okay, let's schedule that for the next planning commission meeting, Mr. Chair, and we'll do some outreach to the public on our website to let them know that we'll be talking about having a housing element update workshop where, if you'll forgive us, we'll repeat some of this information for the benefit of the public.
Will you have a list of things you want us to do as homework between now and then?
Let me think on that. I haven't thought that through yet.
Okay.
We do have to get back to your commission with some questions from Commissioner O'Neill, and we will be sending out the materials that we received, the PowerPoint, and we'll see if there's some things that we can think of to help you between now and that meeting.
Well, at least for us to do individual surveys of potential properties that can be developed as housing opportunity based on our collective knowledge, we can do that.
That'd be great. If you could look at the tables that are in the current housing element and the map And then we can go through a process of elimination of what's on those tables to delete what has already been developed. Like, for example, the Mockingbird project. That's no longer even a part. Go through there and cut off those, or strike or delete, and then let's add to those properties. And you'll see how it's formatted. You'll see that there's a potential development unit column there, and then it's been divided into the 4 income categories. That's where we need to put our focus on trying to figure out how we can get more very low income units out of any possible yield.
Okay. Well, I think that'll wrap up this portion of the item then. So do you have a comment, Ron?
Yes, just one to our planning director. I want to encourage him as he continues to work on his draft of letter, that it not be a meek letter to whoever you're sending it to, and that you have our back. I mean, we have your back on that.
Thank you. I may have to put in some adjectives that would suit your flavor. Thank you.
Wouldn't mind seeing a copy of that once you send it.
Yeah, we'll CC you all as soon as the city manager signs it. That's my hope, to do it as soon as we can before the 18th.
And Wendy, you're going to get us a lot of these materials sent to each of us?
Yes, I'll send it to your planning commission email address.
Thank you. So Christina, are you up next?
Mr. Chair, could we take a 5-minute break? Would that be okay?
Can we have a recess?
We'll take 5 minutes, so we will resume at 7:55.
Please watch the video that Wendy's going to send to you as well. decided we're not coming back, Mr. Chair.
3 kids home, and it's
All right, let's get going. Let's call this meeting back to order and resume item 9.1. Christina?
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, thank you all so much for your time tonight. We're going to shift from the housing element, which is a little bit more of a high-level theoretical discussion, and now we're diving into the zoning code update, which is really exciting. And for me as a planner, the zoning code is something that I deal with every day, and that you as commissioners, we've been working on this now for almost 2 years, so happy anniversary to all of us. And I'm really excited to start this conversation about how to improve the zoning code to better suit our needs. So the last time our Sonoma zoning code was comprehensively updated was in 2005. Since that time, there have been major changes to state law, federal law, and general development trends have really changed, and the intent and the needs of people and developers from our code have changed a great deal. So in January of 2020, there was a joint session of the City Council and the Planning Commission, and that's really where we kicked off discussions about zoning code priorities. And unfortunately, since then, we've had a global pandemic and have not had a whole lot of staff time and Planning Commission time to devote to this issue. In January 2020, the Sonoma City Council did create an ad hoc committee that comprises Mayor Harvey and Councilmember Agramonte. And so first and foremost, our goal tonight is to request that the city manager and city council reenact that ad hoc committee. And tonight, our primary goal is to go through the draft fix-it list that was attached to the agenda. So we'll dig into the details of that a little bit later, but that's my primary goal. And David Storer, the amazing planning director's primary goal is for us to all really dig our teeth into that and get some action. So again, first goal to request the city manager to re-engage the ad hoc committee. Second is to ensure that the zoning code is consistent with state and federal law, which has changed over time. We've discussed at the joint committee about subjective criteria and changes in state law that are requiring that those be removed from the zoning code. As we've all been largely aware of on a project by project basis, our code is not as clear and internally consistent as it should be. And that's another goal of our discussion tonight, to kind of kick off those discussions and to make our code as easy and understandable as possible. We have developers and architects, but who use our code on a daily basis, but we have a lot of just property owners and members of the general public who use our code, and it really should be as easy as possible for everyone to understand and to work with. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the fix-it list is really kind of our to-do list, and that's our primary topic tonight. So the fix-it list that I mentioned was attached to the staff report is broken up into 3 criteria. There are short-term fixes that we hope to have to City Council by the end of 2020. Medium term, which will take about a year from now, will be hopefully to City Council in the next 12 months. And longer term items that will take longer to implement. So
Christina, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes, you may.
Can we really focus just on short term and maybe just briefly touch on the others?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the first item on the list are the temporary tent regulations. This really got kicked off last winter with the hot monk tents, and we juggled with that issue a little bit. And with COVID and the new reopening, business reopening and expansion, this issue is gonna come forward and require some attention and some quick fixes coming up. Some of these issues are pretty, I'm gonna
get in trouble and say boring, but and indemnification language, separating the subdivision provisions from the zoning code, going through the definitions and making sure everything is internally consistent and makes sense. A lot of our definitions might require some careful consideration. They may be outdated. There may be some new ones we want to add in.
Christina, if I can, to point out to the commission, Christina's first bullet point there came at the behest of the city council as it was discussing the urban growth boundary. So again, we're trying to make this all very current based on direction from the council and consistency with state law and the things that Christina's talking about. And the site coverage, the last one that she has there, that has come out as a result of our discussions on the Jasper project and the lawsuit.
Yeah, I think our general goal is for us to focus more time on really important projects and details and not on lawsuits. So permit implementation and time limits. Right now, for example, for design review, we only provide a year for applicants to vest their projects. In many other jurisdictions, it's 2 years, sometimes 3 years for maps and things like that. The noise ordinance is something that we have struggled with as a commission and as staff as far as generators goes, and just generally having it be more clear and easy to implement for developers, members of the public, staff, and the planning commission as well. The tree ordinance is something that I'm particularly excited about and would like to discuss considerations for expanding tree protection. Currently, our ordinance protects trees in the front property yard, and it's really focused more on sort of the aesthetics of a property and perhaps not necessarily on the importance of large mature trees anywhere on a property. And also creating standards for removing trees and replacing trees that are just more clear cut so that everyone can understand. Like to discuss our sign ordinance and consider streamlining that. And sorry, I have children crawling on the floor that you can't see. And just the overall goal is to make it so that any developer and member of the public can really easily understand and implement these rules and requirements. As far as application filing and processing, would love to spend some time looking at who has the authority to review and approve our permits. Currently, pretty much every project that comes through has to be heard by the Planning Commission, and it would be a great topic of discussion whether there are some permits such as sign permits or minor design reviews, things like that, that could be handled by the planning director under his authority and save some of the larger, more controversial projects for the Planning Commission and potentially appeals on smaller projects. With some of the new regulations as far as the timing on the number of hearings that are allowed, considerations for expanding and supporting study sessions before the Planning Commission for larger projects, so that feedback can be given to applicants really early in the process.
Christina, on that particular point, if I could point out the commission, you may have heard us talk about SB 330. That's the law that went into effect January the 1st that limits the amount of public hearings that we can have to 5. And again, that's still being worked out as to whether that includes workshops or not. So we're going to try to fine tune that. And that's part of what Christina's talking about.
Yeah, and that gets back to the issues with the tree ordinance as well. Right now, all of our projects, or most of our projects, go through the tree committee, so that would be counted as one. You have a couple, round of the design review commission, as well as the planning commission. A couple hearings to get through that. We get really close to that 5 very easily. All right. I just touched on design review. I would love to have the planning commission chime in on the existing design review standards and whether they're consistent with SB 35, and also considering the importance of those with the context of our historic overlay district and what our intent is as a community, what's important to us, and making sure that the language that we have in all of those is strong enough to achieve our goals. So that is the list of our short-term fixes. Chair Felder, would you like to go through these sort of short-term, midterm, long-term? Do you want me to go through the list first and circle back?
Mr. Chair, if I can,
Yeah.
we also are looking for your commission's input as to whether we've got things here that shouldn't be here, but maybe things that are on the midterm and long-term that need to be promoted to this list. So
Yeah, so let's continue on quickly through the rest of them.
Okay. All right, so we get now to the medium-term fixes, which is items that we would hope to get through within the next 12 months. So first on the list are the planning area standards. So right now our city's pretty small. It's 2 miles by 2 miles, and it's broken into several different planning areas, and there are different standards based on the zoning district for all of the different areas. I think an important question for the Planning Commission to consider is the merit of the different criteria. For example, if we look at the Central West and the Central East for medium density residential, what are the differences in the zoning district standards, and are those really making a difference in how we apply them to projects moving forward? You know, for such a small city, if there's a way for us to have all of the zoning districts have more of a streamlined approach, it would make it easier for the general public, for developers, for staff, I think for the Planning Commission, for everyone. The next medium-term fix category, back to the planning area standards, one of the considerations is to create design guidelines. And that is one of the state law changes, is to remove any of the objective standards from our development code. And having sort of a standalone design guidelines would be a way for us to implement that change and be consistent with state law.
You mean removing subjective standards?
Subjective, yes.
Correct.
So moving towards objective standards like our site coverage, FAR, which, you know, really is what the bulk of our review is, but it would just help to streamline the process and make it really clear for developers and for everyone.
And your commission already received the first cut of identification of objective and subjective standards, then those that fell somewhere in between from our prior first cut that we kind of received in March from our consultant, and then COVID kind of hit.
So the next category are site planning, use, and development standards. All of those are a little bit outdated, and going through all of them and making sure they're still applicable and important. We also have general standards as well as special use standards. And I believe a conversation about combining some of those and just the general organization will help us as planning staff, as well as members of the general public, understand what the applicable standards are. Clarifying what our setbacks are, how they're measured. Right now, a lot of the direction for how we measure setbacks is actually in the definitions. It's not actually in the code that governs setbacks. And then just, you know, really considering our environmental standards and making sure that they're as strong and clear as we want them to be. We have specific creekside development standards and hillside development standards. And looking at those, I think will be really important. Moving on to our zoning district provisions, we have special purpose and overlay districts. We also have our zones and allowable uses, and those tables have not been revisited in a really long time. The general feel is that pretty much anything needs to go through the Planning Commission. And I think a conversation about what uses, updating what the uses are and what potential changes are really warrant the review and consideration by the Planning Commission will be a really big benefit to the community. And then just kind of this little subset that comes up again and again are tiny homes. And in terms of zoning and development considerations, it's always this tough problem. They're not really allowed for in our zoning code, but there's a lot of interest by the public. And with these RENA constraints and challenges that are coming up, I think it's worth the conversation with tiny homes as well.
Christina, we'd also be inserting the new ADU ordinance that we've adopted, assuming, we still haven't heard commissioners back from HCD as to whether they liked or disliked our urgency ordinance. It may well just be time that we go ahead and adopt it and merge it into this zoning code update, perhaps even as the short-term provisions.
Yeah,
They've had it since March, haven't they, Christina, or even before that?
oh, I think before then, I want to say it was December, January. But in general, looking at our affordable housing section, and is it written in the way that we really want it to function? And we've spent a lot of public meetings and council joint sessions and things like that talking about affordable housing, little a, big A. And this is a great time to look at where the teeth are and how we're affecting how we want our community to look like in the future. And as Planning Director Storer has been working for many months now on the in lieu fees, and moving that forward is going to be a big accomplishment for the city. So I'm going to move a little bit quicker through these. So I think looking at our parking standards is going to be really important moving forward. I think there's some inconsistency in the numbers that we have been working with. And everyone, I think, recognizes that there's a need when we're dealing with parking exceptions, creating some kind of in lieu fees to support transit through the city, and just really thinking kind of big picture about what are our priorities, and with VMT and all these changes happening at the state level, how do we encourage those moving forward for development code? And jumping down to our special use standards. Again, really considering consolidation. Right now, our residential accessory uses and structures are in special use standards, but that is something that we as planners deal with pretty much every day. Everyone wants some detached shed or guest house or something like that. To me, that's not a special use standard. That's more of a general, and just really having a fresh set of eyes on that, and having clear standards for those. We've had numerous use permits that have come before the Planning Commission for second story ADUs and sort of other issues, and making sure, is that really an issue that we want to be raising to the level of transit plan. So jumping now to long-term fixes, which are 12 months plus. So streetscape is our first category, and really considering the effectiveness and the intent of the section. This gets down to road widths and street trees and plantings and things like that. In my experience, I think it has really good intent, but the teeth aren't quite there in how it's affecting our subdivisions and larger projects. And similar issues with our block structure. I really look forward to our discussion about our historic preservation and infill in the historic zone. I think one of the reasons we all love Sonoma so much is because of its historic character and charm. And I think there's a lot of recent projects, and as a planner, some just general feeling that some tweaks to the section will better reflect what we want as a community. And reviewing our fences, hedges, and walls, and making sure that all of our standards are applicable to today's standards, not just 2005 or whenever those were adopted. And we have this public art section that it comes up in our zoning code, and that may or may not be the correct place. Moving on to dedications and exactions. This is part of our subdivision section of the code. One of our top priorities is actually removing the subdivision standards from our zoning code. But a common issue that comes up is that potential developers don't really understand the actual cost of doing business in the city. Park fees and considering traffic fees, all of those things are really kind of buried and not as clear and concise as I believe that they should be. Further on down the list is consideration of how the city approves general plans, development code, and zoning amendments. And a good topic of discussion is who the correct approval body is for really minor changes. Sometimes we have just text changes or really minor issues. And right now, those are all going through the Planning Commission. And part of the problem is, that it's really just another level of review, which sometimes prevents us from making the little changes that are really necessary. And I think if we all look at our code right now, we can see the impacts of that over the years, staff has been reluctant to bring these little changes forward because it's a lot of work. But as far as the general benefit of the public and property owners, developers, the Planning Commission, having a really up-to-date zoning code is extremely important. So making it a little bit quicker and easier to make those minor changes would assist us in the long run. And the final topic on our long-term list is our general allocation, our housing allocation process, and making sure that that is consistent with state law. So that is a big mouthful. And what we're hoping to get tonight are comments and feedback on our priorities. I see Commissioner Barbossa's hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. We had a couple of ADU that came before us for conditional use permits. One of them that Izaki was the applicant, and it seemed that there was a determination made that a conditional use permit was required because while the overall size of the ADU was above the minimum size, the bedroom wasn't above the minimum size, and we were informed that it was the definition required a use permit because of that you could only look at the size of the bedroom, and that's clearly that's not what the intent of the legislature is. These are supposed to be over-the-counter ministerial things and not requiring conditional use permits. So whatever language needs to get fixed to avoid that problem again needs to get addressed. And then there was another conditional use permit for a ADU, which was in the second, it was an attached ADU above an attached garage, or is it, and ran into a kind of a height limit issue when the overall height of the house was within the permissible limits. And it seemed to a number of us on the Planning Commission that they should have been approached as a second story as a matter of right issue. So I think we need to really look at the definitions that apply these ADUs so that we can actually achieve this sort of ministerial quick process and not drag these poor people through a Planning Commission hearing and whatever attendant fees they incur as a result of that and delay.
Commissioner Barnett?
I want to see the issue of fences brought up into the short-term fixes. Specifically, I would like the commission to have the opportunity to discuss requiring fences that will be constructed in the front yard of homes to require an over-the-counter permit so that the rules about fence dimensions and heights are given to the people who have to construct it. I would suggest it be a very low fee, $20 or something for a fence permit, because what I'm seeing happening is fences are being constructed by contractors that do not conform with our fence height limitations. And then they're being completed, and other neighbors in the neighborhood are looking at the illegal fences and saying, oh, I want a fence like that. And you're getting the model for new fences being the illegal fences that have never gone through a permit process, nor has there been a complaint. So I think this is an easy fix. And I'm just looking at the opportunity to get the rule in front of the people who are building these fences so they understand what the limitations are.
I hate to say this, Larry, but that issue came up years and years and years ago on a previous Planning Commission group, and it was never enacted, and we're paying the price for it now.
Yeah, well, sorry to hear that. the only other thing I was going to bring up was exactions. I think exactions is a very interesting topic, but it seems to me that the issue of exactions is really a matter of city council purview, in that a review of the ways in which the city might wish to exact fees or payments for various kinds of actions or developments is a political decision on the part of the city council in some cases. So I'm not really sure, Christina, when you talk about our getting involved in the discussion of exactions, what the planning commission's role would be, because to me, an exaction is a policy issue.
I think my comments on that would be the location of the section and making sure that the language in there is as clear as possible. There are some omissions based on my experience working in other jurisdictions as well.
Okay, but the definition of what would constitute or not constitute, or the decision to impose an exaction, wouldn't be a planning commission decision unless it was established as a policy by the city council. Am I correct?
I mean, it's a code change, so I think the recommendations would come from the planning commission to city council, and just my experience working with the numerous different codes, I think the question is looking big picture, whether we're capturing development fees for potential impacts of our developments that affect our city at a greater level.
Well, for example, the requirement that a cannabis dispensary make a payment for a community benefit or something akin to that would, to me, be an exaction. Would you agree that qualifies in an exaction?
Yeah, so that would be a new consideration, and I agree with you that would require direction from city council.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing, if I can just add to the conversation, and that is exactions and dedications come out of the subdivision ordinance.
Yes.
And what we're doing is we're talking about taking that piece out. So I don't know if that's what Christina had in mind, but there certainly are some exaction dedications that, as you consider a tentative map, that kind of get dovetailed in with the zoning code. We just want to make sure that those things talk to each other.
Correct. I think the first priority would be moving the exactions as well as the subdivision chapter. But just my experience based on working with several larger subdivisions in the last couple of years, it's that section is not written as clearly as possible, and there are some potential opportunities to help shape our community for the future.
Okay, so for example, would the dedication of land for a pocket park be a dedication or an exaction?
So right now we have dedications for park fees under the Quimby Act, but that's a perfect example of how the code could be written clearer or potentially expanded to help support our community and just broader picture moving forward for the next 20 years. What do we want our community to look like?
Okay, thank you.
If I could again, sorry for belaboring this point, but a case in point comes to a project that we were working on where I think it was Mockingbird, Christina, where we had a place in our municipal code that talks about Quimby dedication, and the Quimby fee had never been collected by the city. And here we are now in 2020, and we had better part of $520,000 paid by DeNova for the Mockingbird project because people hadn't looked at the Quimby requirement as it related to the subdivision ordinance, as it relates to the zoning code. And that had been overlooked for decades.
Correct. Yeah, those fees have been in our code for a really, really long time, and we haven't been collecting those fees. If you look back over the last, 2005 was how many years ago? That's a lot of development fees. That's a lot of park improvements that's a missed opportunity.
Also, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Yeah.
This may or may not be germane to our topic, but it's under the umbrella of housing. And I expressed it at our joint meeting, I believe in January with the council. I see that we're discussing affordable housing as one of the topics. I would like to again express interest in talking about workforce housing and or moderate housing and I think moderate may not even be the right word. So I'm go back to workforce housing. I'm still a strong advocate of the idea of providing some sort of housing where the middle band of young family and just couples, whatever, can possibly be able to purchase. So that's my request, comment, or wish.
Okay, Council.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christina, for this presentation. In terms of priorities, in terms of the short term, medium term, and long term, I generally don't have any issue with the way you've divided it. The one just general comment I want to make is, you know, we just had a whole presentation about our housing element and how that's due in early 2023. And we're going to have to basically develop X number of housing units over the next 8 years through 2031. And it's very important to me that we have this entire development code done before that. And so I don't know if the, you know, the fact that this is the second agenda item tonight means this is not as a priority compared to our housing code, or sorry, our housing element. But in my view, the development code is a priority to our housing element, because not only do we have a significant amount of time before we need to approve that, but we need to have this development code ready for future housing development applications to come in. And so yes. I don't care how long it takes in terms of our short-term, medium-term, and long-term, but all of this needs to be done before our housing element is done and before we start really receiving, you know, the sort of next generation of development applications. So in my view, the development code should be a priority. And in addition, typically a city would update the general plan first, and the development code responds to the general plan. And since we're not doing that this time, our updated development code needs to reflect our existing general plan. And those are my comments.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, the housing element is kind of the gun to our head, and we know it's coming. And I think the presentation tonight,
not a gun to our head. It's, we don't have to do it for another 2 years.
But you know, it's really important that we get it started. If we sit on our heels and are not proactive about it and don't start considering it right now, we're going to be in trouble. And it's also an opportunity for us to look at our development code, which is where our power is. So if we know that the RENA numbers are coming and our housing element is going to be amended, this is our opportunity now to look at our code and, well, what can we do to control the situation?
And I support everything you just said. I just want the development code updated and streamlined, or whatever we want to do to it, before all these new applications start coming up. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can add to what Commissioner Barnett has just said, is the housing element is the only element of the mandatory elements that has to be updated every 5 years. And so what you've not heard tonight is, hey, we need to update the general plan. And we clearly know that the general plan needs to be updated, but it's not as broken as the need that we have to do the housing element. And so if we want to kind of get the housing element done, we can do it. And that's why we're doing them in parallel with the dev code. We've got money from the state coming to help us do both tasks. So my goal is to spend every red cent of free money from the state and a pool of money that we've already been storing or saving over the years to do a general plan update. That's going to have to come too. But again, the general plan that was created in 2006 is called the 2020 plan. Not that that places a burden on us to do something in 2020. It's just that this is a good time. Sonoma has had a history of updating its general plan every 10 years. So we got to be sensitive to this particular time, because the planets are aligning where the new RENA process is coming in right at the time that we should be amending our general plan, but more so because we need to update our housing element on a cycle that's every 5 years, which we haven't done in 5 years.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, the elephant in the room is, yes, we do need to update the general plan. Is it as broken as the development code, and is it as pressing as the housing element? I would say no. As a planner working for the city, I don't have issues with the general plan on a day-to-day basis. I do look forward to the day when we can be at the place where we can be talking about climate change and improving our environment and thinking really big picture. But the priorities of the housing element and making these really important changes to the development code will really help that process once if we attack those first.
Well, I think we have agreement. I think we heard from Commissioner Larry Barnett that he'd like to move the fencing up, but we have a list of short-term fixes to be done by the end of the calendar year. I don't think anybody would dispute that we want those things done. So I would like to see these suggested changes coming back to this commission as near term as possible so that we can start acting on it.
Along those lines, just a quick comment. For example, the tent item was the first item on the list. Is that going to be on the topic of our next planning commission meeting to hammer out new regulations pertaining to seasonal tents? Because those applications should be coming in any minute.
Well, I'm even suggesting that might require an urgency ordinance because of the timing.
Yeah, I agree.
And in addition to that, now there's a health issue involved with putting up a tent because it is not an open air structure. So the COVID things have to be run into that thing too.
Yep.
Part of our recommendation tonight is that very thing, and that is to convene the city council ad hoc with Chair Felder and Chair Barnett so that we can get their blessing on the direction they see fit to move forward. And I think that would be an outcome of that group meeting in the very near future so that we can get a tent policy direction to come back to the commission with. But maybe it's an urgency, maybe it's a regular, I don't know, one way or the other. We can analyze that.
I mean, we intend to get done with these short-term fixes by the end of the year. We've got to have some language in front of us to act on.
Well, we need to move fast, and we need to get a consultant because Christina can't carry the heavy lift. She and Wendy are both our first points of contact on business opening and recovery, which we've been spending an inordinate amount of time on. So yeah, we need to get help to assist staff. Wendy is our lead on the housing element update, and I'll be supporting her on that. And then I will be, and then Christina's taking the dev code with Wendy as backup. But clearly both pieces need consultant help. And that's what we'll be using SB2 money to do. We can begin that process on some of these short-term fixes, but we're clearly going to have to do a handoff to a consultant to get us through to hearing and to get the nitty-gritty done.
Well, do we need city council approval to hire that consultant?
No, we can use the ones, I think we can use the ones that we've already retained, unless Wendy and Christina want to go a different direction. Clearly right now, the responsibility is upon them to come up with these ordinances, unless they recommend that we go out and get consultant help, which I think is where we're heading.
Well, whatever it takes to get the language in front of us as soon as possible is the way we ought to go.
Yeah, and clearly we want to get we want to give the city council ad hoc dev code an opportunity to meet with yourself, Mr. Chair, and Kelso, so that we can get moving on this thing right away.
Okay, are there other questions, Kelso?
Yeah, regarding the tent policy, the city council last night, maybe David can speak to that, or Christina. I mean, there's clearly a sort of business reopening plan the city council is executing, especially on the plaza in terms of outdoor seating. And, I have a feeling this winter, 2020 through 2021, is going to be, fairly lax in terms of tents. Totally understandably, by the way. And so I don't know how much of a priority that tent policy is this fall. I think the chair made a good point in terms of these are indoor spaces, and in terms of the virus and in terms of liability and all that, that's almost sort of beyond our pay grade. But it appears that there's already sort of movement on trying to facilitate outdoor tented dining over the winter. So I don't know what's going on in terms of that, but I don't know how much our development code changes are going to affect that, because I feel like the city council has already given the planning department authority to just sort of approve things over the counter. Am I correct in that?
I'll speak first, and I'll let Wendy and Christina think of some add-on comments. When we started the concept of allowing land use to occur, we first started out issuing temporary use permits on private property as a planning department, and following examples of other jurisdictions, they were basically going even more streamlined than that, and just allowing over-the-counter approvals or no approvals at all, as long as the land use is on private property to help their business recover. So in theory, Hopmonk could put some kind of tables out in their parking lot, for example, without coming to us for a Mother May I temporary use permit. When it comes to a tent structure, however, that's a little bit different. And that's what I think Christina and Wendy are talking about. They can address that in a minute. Because we're now talking about going into on-street parking to create parklets with or without canopies or awnings, if you will. When it comes to the issuance of anything in the public right-of-way, we're not doing we are doing temporary use permits for sidewalk areas, but we are doing encroachment permits into the streetway or the traveled way, if you will. Christine and Wendy, if you want to take it from there, this has been an ongoing discussion. Even today, we've had an updated meeting.
Wendy, I'll let you go first if you have any comments.
Everything David said is correct. How about that?
Woohoo! That's a first.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that, I think that sort of the way that we viewed tents previously compared to the way that we're viewing tents now, there's a big discrepancy, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. We've been relying on these temporary use permits, which are really not the correct vehicle for approving these tents. The time limits and other limitations with the temporary use permit are just, it's just not the correct permitting vehicle. I think it's a pretty easy fix, and having some general guidelines as to what we want them to look like and being really clear about what our expectations are, I think will make it easier for the business community to react.
Christina, could you talk real quick? I'm sorry, Kelsey, do you want to go ahead? I was just going to ask a question, let Christina think about it for a minute. We do have a procedure for allowing tents or canopies over a certain size to go through the fire department. Can you educate me on that one again?
You mean just through the fire department and skipping planning?
Well, what is the process right now for having the fire department over a certain amount of square footage? Is that over? Was I thinking about 400 square feet?
Gosh, I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. So there's a certain threshold. Wendy probably can chime in a little bit better than I can. There's a certain threshold for where the tent requires fire department approval, but that's a different threshold for what requires a temporary use permit from the city.
It was my impression that all of the movement to allow businesses to open in outdoor spaces, we're talking about canopies, not tents. Is that true?
Yes.
So they are still open air.
They can only have one wall.
Yeah, and that's the guidance from the state as far as dealing with coronavirus. And that's kind of a separate issue from what we were dealing with on Hopmonk or Walt Wines and these other tents that have been taking staff time and commission time over the last year.
So if Hopmonk came back to us with a tent proposal, they could only have one wall?
Correct, under current state guidelines.
That was my question.
Other commissioners want to chime in, or I'll open it up to the public. Could you take this sharing off so I can see everybody, please?
I can try.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else have questions of staff on this fix-it list before we open it to the public? Okay, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Wendy, is there anybody who got their hand raised?
Yes, we have a hand raised from Fred Alabak. Fred Alabak, you may speak.
Just unmute myself. This is a fascinating discussion of policy here, and I wanted to comment a little bit on the parking. It strikes me that if the city does need to rezone some places for a higher density, you know, maybe along the Highway 12 corridor or wherever, that there seems to be in my mind, a potential that parking would start to conflict with the affordable housing density, and that the people who live there might not be able to have cars or a place to have a truck, a work truck, for example, and the people might possibly work in places where transit lines didn't go. So I was envisioning a possible situation where parking codes would conflict with an aspiration for social sustainability in Sonoma, you know, by having a broad spectrum of, you know, class and races in Sonoma that would reflect the diversity of the county and the Bay Area as a whole. So I would just kind of caution to keep in mind with these development code language changes and the whole thing about subjective language and you know, this is an opportunity where people can inject values into the situation, you know, under the guise of clearing it up. You know, the language is going to steer it in a particular way. Christina mentioned that you know, that they working on the code is, you know, what can we do to control the situation? So I think, you know, parking and other things might be an opportunity to steer things towards more social sustainability, and I'd like to encourage the Planning Commission to keep that in mind as you're working on these language changes in the development code and the housing element. So thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Anyone else, Wendy?
Yes, we do have written comment from David Eicher, and let me read that. Planning Commissioners, I have a comment about the following fix of the development code. Short-term fixes, application filing and processing. 26, critically consider authority for land use and zoning decisions. Consider increasing permits approvable by the planning director with appeals by the Planning Commission and City Council. I oppose moving land use and zoning designation or decisions from the Planning Commission to the planning director. The major problem is that the public will most likely not know about any planning director's decision until after the deadline to appeal. Just look at what is happening in the county with the Victory Station warehouse at 8th Street East and Fremont Drive, and Amazon's use of it as a distribution center. Administrative approvals at the county level resulting in angry local residents who are not informed in time to appeal the first administrative appeal, and there are issues with the last administrative approval. Administrative approvals almost always do not allow the public to be informed about a project before approval, resulting in almost no public comment being made. One example might have been the recent 3-badge project on Patton Street. If it wasn't for the fact that 3-badge project needed a use permit for the restaurant and wine tasting, a reconfiguration of the parking lot may not have been brought to my attention. The original parking plan put the required disabled parking on the street, not in the parking lot. Once I commented that the disabled parking space should be in the parking lot for the safety of the disabled person, the applicant changed the design prior to Planning Commission's hearing. Please don't take away the public voices. Regards, David Eicher. And that's it for public comment.
No one else in the audience has a hand raised?
No.
I'm going to close public comment on this item then. Bring it back to the commission for further discussion. Okay, let's have Dev Code 101. Where do we go from here, Christina?
So I think the only recommended changes that I heard were about moving fences up to short term and then considering moving tents to midterm. Am I missing anything?
Well, the ADU language that I think should be dealt with short term, it sounds like it's just a couple words in the.
Yeah, so the ADU issue, it's not really in the ADU section. That's with the detached accessory structures. So our detached accessory structures are limited to single story. So addressing it in that section, I believe we already have that in short term.
Well,
I mean, this was this nonsensical thing where somebody needed a use permit on a 300-foot ADU because the bedroom wasn't the size of the minimum. And it was, they didn't take into account, the city didn't take into account the size of the living room and the kitchen.
well, I thought I heard our planning director say that maybe we should just roll the ADU thing into the dev code right now and get these changes in there.
Yeah, so we should be facilitating this, particularly in light of the way we can count these things for our arena numbers. So we want to facilitate them, not make them more difficult.
So why don't we move ADU, the whole subsection, into the dev code as a short term?
Yeah, I'd love to be able to get as much credit and traction on building ADUs as we can to support an argument that we can get credit for more than 10 a year.
Other comments? Jim?
Christina, over on long-term, you've got historic preservation, infill, and historic zone. I don't really know the answer to this at all, but is there any tension between 64 through 67 and the new state overlay guidelines such that that would be a bigger priority or not? The way you see it?
64 through
67, the historic preservation and infill in the historic zone is under long-term right now.
you're talking about my list?
Yeah.
You know that I'm not aware of how that would be have any issues with state law. I think the reason that's in long term is it's just going to be what I envision to be a really big discussion, a big picture discussion. We've had numerous projects lately where we've had issues with what the general public might consider being really important for historic preservation versus CEQA guidelines. And I think that conversation is just naturally going to take a longer time. That doesn't mean I don't think we should start it sooner rather than later, but I don't see that being something we're going to resolve by the end of the year or even in the next 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Also?
Can I do a follow-up on that? Recent state law, and I don't know if it affects Sonoma because, again, I don't think we're an urbanized area and I don't know if we're targeted for this, but they've sort of established a year that you can't consider the historic significance of a property if it hasn't already been designated historic before, I want to say 2018 or 2019. And so there might, for some of the recent laws that have been changed, there might not be a sense of urgency on that because the time has already elapsed. But in terms of going forward, and in terms of the state legislature continuing to try to take our responsibilities away, I think it would be very important for the city to do an updated historic building inventory, which I believe the last time that was done was by the League of Historic Preservation in 1978. And we're sort of still using that, where there may be new buildings that might be newer or maybe weren't recognized in 1978 that should be on that inventory. And so, you know, if there's funding for that, I think that would be a big priority from a historic preservation standpoint. And it's just, and that's a consultant project. The League and the Historical Society could probably do that, you know, if you want to work with them. But, you know, that is a priority. We also still have a historic train district that hasn't been done yet, which we've discussed when I was on the Design Review Commission back in 2015. So I can understand why we're trying to get the housing element going now because, you know, things seem to take a long time.
Yeah, and I would just add, even looking at, you know, what do we consider our historic overlay district from working with our development code for a long time. There's some really interesting cutoffs where what is defined as the historic overlay from the city's perspective versus as a member of the general public.
So when can we see something back from our consultant or our staff?
I will let David chime in on that.
I think the first step would be to convene the city council ad hoc and have your input, Mr. Chair and Kelso, to work out a plan of attack on the right priorities. And then we can come back to the commission after we've met. We certainly will meet, I'm sure, between now and the next planning commission meeting. We can provide an update on timing and priorities of the council. We know that the money will be there. And parenthetically, we have submitted a request already to HCD for our first partial reimbursement of money that we spent, about $5,000 on the town halls that we conducted, and some support for the accessory dwelling units, I can't say ADU ordinance that we created. The point being is we should be able to spend some money on getting those consultants engaged. So I'd first like to get the city council to give us a blessing on our short-term list, and then the ad hoc, and then we move forward in implementation.
I would like to nominate Ron Wellender to join us on the ad hoc as an additional planning commissioner. So when you approach them to get the ad hoc going, can you try to get his name added?
As long as we can get Wendy to help him get on the Zoom, then yes. But if it's an impediment to Mr. Wallander, then no.
I'll help him, I promise.
I couldn't resist that one. I'm sorry. It was so easy teed up.
All right. But anyway, so you'll get back to us on when we can get it together as an ad hoc?
Yeah. I'm going to contact the city manager and see if we can get that set up. I've spoken with Mayor Harvey, and he's eager to go too.
I have a question, by the way, from last night's council meeting. I didn't watch it. Has there been an interim city manager appointed?
I can address that in items from the director, if that's okay.
Anything else? Yes, Ron.
I just wanted to go and reemphasize comments by the chair, and that is, I believe I support, and maybe other commissioners do too, whatever we have to do to move the ball down the field in terms of updating the development code. And if that means a special meeting, a second meeting in a given month, I think I've heard enough from fellow commissioners that there is a willingness to put forth the extra effort. And I do recognize that we have limited staff and we have a lot of issues to address beyond what we've discussed tonight. But I just wanted to reiterate that I believe there's a willingness on our part to, if we need a special meeting, to make some progress. I would love to see it.
Yeah, in fact, we're looking at the calendar right now. There's not that many months between now and the end of the year, and we all know that there's 20 days to notice something in the paper, and then there's a second reading of an ordinance, and then there's 30 days after that ordinance before it become effective. So it really does, we really have to decide how we're going to get that thing done sooner rather than later. And maybe it does require an urgency ordinance. I don't know. That certainly will help us get something adopted before the end of the year. We want to get something done before the end of the year.
Well, potentially I'm going to be kicked to the curb, so I'm anxious to get involved.
All right, so January it is then.
Thanks.
I have a follow-up on Vice Chair Wellender's point, and we discussed consultants earlier. Is there anything that, and I believe Commissioner Barbo's earlier, humbly discussed the ability of this commission, and is there anything that this commission can do, either in additional meetings or in ad hoc committees that would reduce the need for a consultant? I mean, is there any way we can contribute to this process and perhaps,
I'm open to any ideas to get the thing done before the end of the year on the first phase.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to write an ordinance, let's say on tree committee or tree commission, you'd have to fight it out of Christina's hands first. But if there's a particular area of emphasis that you want to help on, whether it's parking standards, you want to help with Wendy on that. She's our go-to staff person on this. We're happy to receive any help we can get. And yes, it will reduce it. I mean, if we come up with a document to say, hey, consultant, read this, make sure it makes sense. Is it consistent with where we want to go? Then it's that much less that we have to pay them to do. It's like handing them a watch and asking them to tell you the time.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think that there's no reason why we couldn't, I believe, as members of the Planning Commission, split up into smaller working groups that don't trigger any Brown Act issues. In other words, groups of 2 or 3 to work on a specific area to come up with some recommendations and suggested language, which could then, working with Christina, or for that matter, Wendy, you know, basically come forward with some ideas that would then come back to the full commission. For example, if the issue was who among us wants to work on the issue of trees and tree protection, you know, are there 2 or 3 people who want to volunteer to work on that and take a look at the issues and the current ordinances and come up with some suggestions? Same thing with some of these other shorter term items. And we could just go through the list and break out into smaller working groups and then bring that material back to the larger group as a whole.
How about we do this on the spirit of that? Could you take a look at the short terms as we'll have Christina send out a modified list of short terms. Why don't you as commissioners circle the ones that you want to be engaged with? We can certainly do that. And then, you know, if everybody wants to do trees, we'll have to figure out a way how to split that up, split the tree.
I might punch and kick, I'm just going to say.
But the point being is, I mean, to the spirit of the issue here, you know, if there's like 4 or 5 different themes, we could do that, and Christina can orchestrate it. And the same with Wendy on the housing element.
I think I already heard Commissioner Barbos volunteer for ADUs.
I did, and I will.
So send out that revised list and ask people to respond where their interest is.
Great.
You can orchestrate the formation of potential ad hoc groups and just coordinate it with me so I know what's going on.
Then, Mr. Chair, what we could do is inform the City Council ad hoc. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
And because they may have an interest in some of those meetings as well. And then we can report back to the Planning Commission in the October meeting.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll meet before that.
And at that point, if we're in little ad hoc groups and we're working on trees, or we're working on tents, or we're working on ADUs, or whatever the topic is, what I would suggest at that point is, you know, I would look at others, and I'm sure people have already thought of this, but I would look at other cities similar to us, like Healdsburg or St. Helena, or maybe a town in Marin County or something. I bet a lot of these other towns have already written ordinances, basically similar to what we want to do. And it's literally just an exercise of cut and paste and, or copy and paste, and then sort of, you know, shaping it for Sonoma. I mean,
that's a great point. In fact,
seems like it should be this hard.
Yeah, one of the discussions I've had with other planning directors is using the assistance of consultants between the 2 or 3 of us. So, for example, the planning director in Cotati is open to the idea of having one land use consultant help with the housing elements, and that way we can kind of save costs that way. The same could be applied to ordinance writing, because every city in the state of California has got to do objective standards,
right,
or at least remove the subjective stuff so that we're not tempted to use that in approving or when we review projects, which we can't do anyway. So,
right.
I mean, theoretically the stuff could be there, we just can't use it. So why not just get rid of it? So certainly, yeah, if there's an economy of scale, we're open to that.
Yeah, and I would just add that some of these changes that we're talking about will actually free up a lot of staff time. You know, right now, Wendy and I spend a lot of time doing some of the admin work associated with signs and some really minor design review things. And if we were able to free up our time so we could look at some of the bigger picture items, that's another way to utilize both of us who work with the code on a really regular basis compared to hiring a consultant.
We need to figure out logistically how we can have some of these ad hoc committee meetings, if we could set up some separate Zoom sessions or whatever.
Well, I've got a Zoom account, which I can use for whatever groups I'm part of. And it's, you know, one of the ones that gives me an hour and a half. And I can have as many people as I want. But anyway, Zoom, it isn't cheap, but to set up your own account so you can have as lengthy a meeting as you want, I think it's $140 a year or something.
I'm happy to set those up too. So I think it sounds like the priorities. I'll send out the list to all the commissioners about the short term. If everyone can identify which items they're interested in, I can get together with Director Storer and we can set up some breakout groups.
And we should let alternate Commissioner McDonald know about this as well, because he can participate in one of these breakout groups as well.
Great.
I'm also happy to meet in the plaza, if we don't want to do Zoom. I don't know if anyone on my ad hoc committee would be open to that, but it would be nice to see people again. So I'm open to all that. Yeah.
Okay.
6 feet apart.
Yes.
That's great. I think this is, what I refer to as working smart. I'm really glad to hear that there's an openness to this, and I appreciate staff's willingness to give it a try with us.
Well, you guys are smarter than us anyway, so.
I wasn't going to say that.
Any further comment on this item before we close it? Seeing none, let's move on to issues update.
Oh, is that me?
That's you.
Sorry. I was sitting there going, who's quiet? I know you've heard a lot from me tonight, so I apologize for that. But to address, I think, somebody's question about the city manager position. As you know, Kathy announced her retirement last night. The city council authorized the release of an RFP to certain groups. And I think the city manager will be looking at the top 3 to return with an ad hoc of the council to report back to the full council on the top 3 proposers that respond to that RFP. And I believe that direction has been given to the city manager about the appointment of an interim city manager, and that will be yet to be rolled out. I've tried to make contact with Verizon, but still have not received anything from them to review. You may recall that we have that between now and the end of the year to work on. And as soon as I get something and can react to it, we'll be setting that up. Going to the city council to see if they then, depending on what it is that gets submitted, whether that comes back to the commission or not. I think I reported on that last time, but crickets, as one commissioner has accused me of playing with. Then the last thing I wanted to do is just say, last night, the city council continued the conditional certificate to Spark to the next meeting on the 21st to allow us to work on some policy direction relating to indemnification, insurance, and some other logistics relating to how Spark will operate their business. So we hope to have those things teed up for the next meeting on the 21st. And that concludes my comments, Mr. Chair.
That has to come to Planning Commission at some point for a use permit?
Yes, sir. So the conditional certificate authorizes Spark to seek the approval of ultimately a commercial cannabis business permit, a CCBP. But before they do that, which is a ministerial permit through the city manager, which basically says that Spark has received its conditional use permit from the Planning Commission, has completed all of the conditions of approval of the Planning Commission, has submitted for a building permit, done the TIs, and got a certificate of occupancy. Then the city manager issues a CCBP, which is reviewed every year. So the answer is yes, Spark is working on an application, and we hope to get that very soon. They've indicated to us, and I think they did it during the presentation they made to the council, that they didn't think there was going to be a lot of TIs to go. Certainly the site work is completed, or not going to require much change. It's just the architecture of the facility where the Mexican restaurant was.
Okay, thank you.
Question. David, if Measure Y passes this November, what does it do to the Spark application? Are they still able to move ahead?
Well, yes, they can. The question, I think, an extension of the same question, Commissioner Barnett, is what, I mean, yes, they could do that. They could, I suppose, say, oh, bag that. We're no longer interested in that. We'll go somewhere else and go pursuant to what the measure authorizes. That's the one answer to the question. I suspect that Spark will continue on with the process that they've entered into regardless. And yes, they'll be paying the 4% cannabis tax if that passes, plus a share of their profits that they indicated last night. The question then becomes what happens to the other cannabis proposers out there, not just the 9 that didn't get the CC, the conditional certificate. Could they go anywhere they want, do anything they want without planning commission review? The answer is unfortunately yes.
I was under the impression the city attorney has an opinion that since measure-wise ordinance says the city council ultimately has the responsibility to protect the health and safety of Sonoma, that they could deem. Do you remember that opinion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The same question that the other Commissioner Barnett asked was, what
Right.
happens if it passes? What does that mean? And the city attorney said, yes, under the rubric of the measure, he believes there's sufficient language within it to then allow the city council to embody what they've already done in ordinance number 03/2019 and 04/2019, to then put that into the fabric of our code and still be consistent with the measure. He believes that permission is there in the measure, and that will have to be tested, of course.
Sounds like a lawsuit.
Other comments from commissioners? I don't see any, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.